to start us with her first introduction. And just for the podcast, as we're recording, hey everyone, we're recording from an Instagram Live, all about personal finance and immigration for healthcare professionals. And I'm here today with two doctors who are going to be sharing some of their expertise in this area, their personal experiences, their professional experiences. So I'll introduce or kick it over to Arunima first to introduce herself.
Sure. So my name is Arunima, or Niba, or Dr. Bera, as people call me at work. I am a pediatric ICU physician, and I'm currently working in a underserved area of California. So yeah, it's just a great privilege to be working in this community and applying all my skills and knowledge and experiences I've accrued. And I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation where we're talking about money. It's just not had enough, especially in the medical space. So yeah, I'm really happy to join you and Justin in my chat today.
Wonderful. Justin, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Justin. I am currently in training for pediatric critical care as well. I'm in fellowship right now, and live in California also. Took a couple years out after residency before going back for training, and been excited to be part of this conversation. Money has been a topic that I've been really excited learning about and sharing with others, and excited to be here and learn from y'all as well.
Absolutely. And Justin, you're also like a personal finance influencer, blogger, Instagrammer. How do you describe it? You've got Simple Finance Community, which has awesome content.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I would describe myself as an educator. I feel like financial education is pretty sorely lacking in our medical training for a lot of medical professionals. And it's something that I got hit very hard with when I was graduating from medical school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and realized I had no idea what to do with that and where to go. And so became really passionate about learning and growing as much as I can in that area. And since then, I've been really excited to share it with other trainees that I've worked with and colleagues. And I've realized that it's a huge area of need and a huge area of lacking in our education as medical professionals.
Absolutely. That sounds a lot like what the experience is for lawyers too. I think it's probably really similar. It's like you get highly trained in these areas and then no one tells you about how to like manage a budget, right? Or like any of these, or all the debt you have.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. It's amazing that people are so willing to let us take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans and then be like, good luck, figure it out.
Totally.
So, yeah.
It's crazy. I'll just introduce myself quickly for folks new to our community listening. Hi everyone, I'm Adina Applebaum. I am an immigration attorney and accredited financial counselor. So I kind of look at the financial system for immigrants and their families, like from the immigration law perspective, from the financial perspective. And my interest in this area really came from personal experience with my husband, Mauricio, who's an immigrant from Ecuador. Just because when he came here, we struggled a lot with money. I was in law school, so similar to the med school thing, like hundreds of thousands of debt on my shoulders, and like barely living paycheck to paycheck. And we couldn't figure out if he could like have a bank account or have a credit card or invest. And there was no information anywhere about these topics for immigrants. So I'm really excited to be talking to you all about that, because I know you've seen that too for the immigrant community in this space of healthcare professionals. So yeah, I guess we can get started. Does anyone want to kick us off with the first question we have prepared, or jump on anything?
Yeah, I think with the first and foremost, just to approach the topic of personal finance, right? And like, when is the right time to get into it? Just to piggyback a little bit on what you guys have already mentioned, I think it's wild, right? We have so many years of training on really technical skills, and building acumen, and also learning to like serve our communities and give it our like 200% every day. But the one thing that is so pervasive in our life, which is managing money, which is really, let's be honest, that's what fuels everything. That's something that we don't really get to know. So when do you think getting into personal finances, when is the right time? I mean, I feel it was yesterday, but when do you think is the right time to get into that?
Yeah, honestly, I agree with you. I think yesterday was the right time. But I think that there are steps that you can take at every point along the journey. And, if you are, since we're talking specifically for medical professionals, if you are, a pre-med student or a pre-PA or whatever, I mean, now's the time to start thinking about, learning to budget and how do you manage a credit card and pay it off every month and not go into debt in that regard? Where do you, how do you manage your application fees and save for those? I think, there are practical steps along every point of the journey that you can start taking. And then as you kind of grow in your career and you start making money, and you can start learning about investing and all those types of things. And so, I agree with you. I think yesterday is the right time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think time is just such an important thing to focus on here, because with finances, a lot of it is about time and like not losing time so that your money can work for you. Like with investing, it's all about time in the market for it to grow. And that's something that we've seen a lot of people are not told about in the immigrant community. It's just not commonly talked about. So people are missing out on that information. And I'm interested. What have you all seen in with healthcare professionals? And Arunima, I believe you're an immigrant yourself, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about like your experience with like when did this become an issue for you and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, so I came into the US as a medical student. It was relatively early. I mean, people come in different life stages and whatnot, but I kind of got integrated into like learning about finances, from the time that I was a student, which in some ways, helped in progressing through like the next like stages of residency and then so on and so forth. There was still a big learning curve in just like getting to know the system, getting to know like how credit cards work, realizing it's very easy to get into debt. It's so easy to get a credit card, and then next thing you know, you have 5. So that was a lot of like learning for me. I think something that I also needed to really tell myself, and honestly, a lot of this came from other people telling me, some of my friends, and then I did get a lot of education and help from like a financial advisor, that no matter what background you are from, as long as you do your research, you can absolutely not only save money but build wealth, start investing, and also like securing your financial future in terms of like getting disability insurance or getting other forms of insurance. And I think a lot of it was mindset, right? So there's the mindset of it where like you are absolutely worthy of doing those things, even when you're making like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 as like a trainee, all the way to, when you do make it as an attending and then you do earn more. So a big part of that is mindset. And I think there's also a component of what I actually wished I started doing earlier, which was the habit of putting money aside for saving and for investing. Because I feel like the more you normalize that for yourself, eventually when you do get to that stage where you can, instead of maybe just putting in $10 aside for saving or investing, now you're putting in like hundreds or thousands, it's not as much of a jolt to the system, right? So if I could have given myself feedback when I was younger, that's probably what I would have done, which is start much earlier. But I think now with sort of the democratization of financial education, which both of you are doing on this platform too, and just with so much more access being made available to people, I'm just seeing a change, and I'm hopeful that it gets even more and more accessible to people. So yeah, that's my take.
I love that. Can I ask you a follow-up question about the mindset stuff? Like, because, we all face mindset stuff with money, no matter where we're from, who we are. So how does the immigrant experience add another layer to that when it comes to finances? I mean, we can talk about this all night, but I really want to hear what you think.
Right. No, that's a great question. And I will say, like, before I even answer that, this is only speaking from my personal experience. Even though I do come from an immigrant background, I'm extremely privileged that, our family is relatively well off, and that, my parents did help me out a little bit with my education and, paying off my debt. I didn't really have as much of a pressure to send money back home or, supporting other members of my family, because I am aware that a lot of people have those responsibilities on them. So I just want to get that out of the way. But having said that, I think there was still this additional pressure of having to or wanting to save as much money as possible. I think in the process of also getting used to the sheer cost of living in a urban setting, working in a hospital and making a salary that honestly has not been updated since the late 90s. That's what the problem is for a lot of residents and fellows. That kind of mental pressure is there. And I would say that's universal for both people, who are immigrants, who are not, right? But it's always that additional pressure of I need to make sure that my family knows that I am okay and I am doing okay and I am surviving and hopefully thriving too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it was. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your experience. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people would relate to that. Yeah. Do we want to talk a little bit about when? Oh, we covered when. Okay, what are some of the challenges to managing finances and some of the kind of first steps that you all would recommend?
Yeah, Justin, you can take it.
Sure. I think that I really like what you said about developing habits. I think that there's a lot of time, a pressure to feel that you have to be devoting a lot of money towards something to make it meaningful. And I think that, even being able to devote, $10, $20 a month towards a financial goal is meaningful. And, as your income and experience grows, then you can expand that and grow that. I think that, one of the things that I always really try to emphasize, especially for people in the medical field is, learning the habits of budgeting. There's this ideal doctor lifestyle that everybody talks about, and I imagine it's somewhat similar in law. I made it, so now I have to live it up. And I think that learning to track your money, know where it's going, is an invaluable habit. And then I always talk about establishing an emergency fund being one of your first goals, and kind of getting started in that regard, and getting 3 to 6 months of your expenses, start putting that away so that you have it as you accomplish your other goals should something else happen. And those are, I think, really great places to start. And then, understanding student debt, understanding your loans, the terms of your loans, the interest, what that means, how much it's going to cost you, how are you going to pay it off? Are you going to go through some sort of loan forgiveness program? Is it going to be cost effective for you versus getting a high paying job and tackling it and paying it off? And so I think, kind of understanding the basics of what is in front of you and educating yourself on those particular topics.
That's an amazing overview. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think personally, a challenge that I had like initially in my financial journey was, like you mentioned, just like making sure that you have those habits. And I do think that with the idea of like automating certain those habits, you don't even have to think about it as much.
I love automating.
Yeah, automating, like whoever invented that, should get all the extra points, because it really takes that like active thinking out of your head.
Right.
The one thing that I would say, and this might be a segue into talking a little bit about like lifestyle inflation, so the whole thing about like making that transition from a trainee to, when you sort of get that first big job and not falling into the trap of, okay, now I'm making, 2x, 3x the amount of money. So that means I can buy the Porsche, right? Or I can, get that fancy condo, like whatever. And there is this thing where I just like to think of it as like, in terms of our relationship with money, it should, there's a bell-shaped curve to most things, right? You don't want to be on the extremely restrictive side, because you have worked hard for that money, right? So the guilt of wanting to spend your money is also very real, and honestly, that is also something I battle with. Even now, you don't want to be too restrictive, and at the same time, of course, you don't want to be too careless. You want to be right sort of in the middle where you have your savings, you have your investments, and all of that done, and then you're able to be able to enjoy your money in real time, whatever that means to you. So again, it's the emotions behind it, right? For me, money is really very emotional.
It is. It's all psychology.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's how it can be a little bit challenging. But again, with education, with talking about it, because there's a lot of stigma around even discussing money. Especially in so I'm South Asian, in the South Asian community. There's a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of like, okay, no one should know like if we are, in any kind of trouble. And I think it's time to get out of that. But everyone, could benefit from being more open about it.
That's right. I'm so excited about the fact we're just doing this. We've got 2 doctors here, like showing up and talking about money. You all are both on call right now, I believe. Right? Are you still each on call? You could be called into the hospital at any moment. And you're taking time to talk about this issue because it's so important and affects people's lives so much. So I really appreciate you both highlighting the issue and taking the time to do it.
Thank you as well.
Yeah.
So there's like a million topics for us to talk about. What else do you guys want to talk about?
I wanted to piggyback on something. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No. I was just going to say, if you guys have had any challenges, please share away.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on something that you were talking about. I think that, there is a lot of secrecy on money, and there's also a lot of shame around money. And, the culture around personal finance traditionally has been, kind of a top-down approach, and very much kind of, in many ways, as medicine has been a patriarchal kind of approach to finance, right? Let me tell you what to do with your money. Let me tell you how to do it. You don't have the ability to understand this. It's too complicated for you. So I'll tell you what you need to do. And, oh, you should feel bad because you didn't do it this way, and you should have done it this way. And so I think historically, there's been a lot of shame around money and managing our personal finances and mistakes that we've made. And so I think I really see that shifting, and I appreciate that so much. And I love, seeing that it's, as you said, the democratization of this and being able to talk about these things openly and take away the stigma of, oh man, I have a lot of student debt, or I made some mistakes and got into some credit card debt and I'm dealing with it, or, just kind of overcoming that shame narrative and approaching it with a narrative of empowerment. So,
That
Yeah.
really resonates, and I think that's very powerful for you to be saying as a doctor, is we look at doctors with such authority, right? And you just assume they know everything. And so for you all to show up as doctors and be like, we've struggled with this, and we know other people have struggled with this, it's huge. And it really just underscores like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, whether you're an immigrant or not, whether you're a doctor or working in a restaurant, whatever it is, like these are really hard issues that are emotional. Yeah, that's a big theme coming up, the emotions of finance I'm hearing. Ooh, we could talk about that a lot.
Yeah, I think, just speaking about like things that are empowering, I think also in the process of like really getting any job, not just like your first job out of training, is the process of negotiation. So if I could just have a few minutes and, we can dive into it. There are a few things in life that I want to have a microphone about, and negotiation is one of them. Like if I could stand at the helipad of every hospital and just like, please, like, guys, please negotiate your contract. They did like a bunch of different surveys across different professions, and it's something to the tune of like 60% of women, especially, have never negotiated any of their contracts. And within medicine, especially, I was looking at the study where they looked at all the surgical trainings, and women surgical trainees had lower estimates of their salary. So they had basically undervalued themselves. And then on top of that, when you don't negotiate, I think that's also one of the reasons why there's such a big wage gap between men and women. And this isn't necessarily our fault. I think a lot of it is just like, no one really tells you how to do it. Again, no one really told us like how to negotiate. And but having gone through the process, it is just so empowering, because first of all, you get to know that you can negotiate, and that hospitals and clinics always have more money than they let on to give you. So don't let them get away with that. But no, it's really about like advocating for yourself, right? At the end of the day, and realizing that, again, it's not a shameful thing to be talking about money. It may feel gauche, it may feel tacky, it may feel awkward, but it's not. And so, how I went about my first contract negotiation was honestly like when I was in the process of doing my job interviews, when I would get those offer letters from the initial, letter from the hospital, I would show it to a trusted mentor, or, an attending that I was working with that I really trusted and confided in, and they would give me really good, feedback. Sometimes I would have them proofread my sort of negotiation email that I would send back to them. Just saying like, is this okay? Is this reasonable to like ask them? And the thing about negotiating is it's never just like a one-off thing. There can be a good amount of back and forth, which is okay. But yeah, I just learned so much about myself. And, when you put yourself through a couple of those processes, you just get to learn like how you also behave in these situations. So it's just an awesome feeling. So that is my whole bit of negotiation.
That's so important. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, super valuable. And I think that the same skill set applies to a lot of financial topics from what I've seen, especially for the immigrant community. To bring it back to our topic for tonight, like there's a lot of things where you just may not know whether you can do something, or why you got that charge on your credit card, or why they're telling you you can't open a bank account. And a lot of it comes down to like having that willingness, even if it's uncomfortable, to choose to believe in yourself, just like what you're talking about with the negotiating, and just like ask a question or make that call and like be a financial advocate for yourself. That's something we work on a lot with folks in our community, is just like, you get a charge, like call up your credit card and be like, why did I get that charge? you know, like you have nothing to lose, right? And a lot of times they'll just reverse it just because you called. You know, and it's learning that skill set applies, I think, to everything when it comes to finances.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's a really good point that, especially because the language around finances, I would also say a lot of the legal stuff is so there's so much of jargon in, I mean, also in medicine, let's be honest, but so much of it is almost purposefully written and framed in a way for you to not understand it. And this goes to even professionals like us, right?
Yes.
So it's almost like someone has to translate what this document like even means to you. Right. So, and it can be very intimidating because it is about money. So when there's that fear sets in of, oh, someone can come and take my money. I remember feeling that a lot as a student too, with all these fees and terms of conditions and all these things like that done all at the same time. Where I was like, oh, like, you know, are they like out to get me? So I think it's a really great skill to teach people. That is just okay to ask questions. It's okay to call up, you know, that company and just ask questions to want to like understand more. And I would also add to make that information accessible in different languages. Just because the US is only getting more and more diverse. I know a lot of it is available in Spanish, which is great. But I do think that, you know, it could be, depending on the region, of course, should be accessible to in different languages, if possible.
Yeah.
Adina, I was wondering if, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Justin.
I was just wondering if you could share, you know, I've been really learning a lot from you and following you here on Instagram. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing and some of the common roadblocks that you've seen the immigrant community come up against, because it's definitely something I'm learning a lot from you as you share.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that and the support. Absolutely. I mean, like we're talking about, everybody has challenges. So there's just that extra layer a lot of times. If you're an immigrant or a family member of an immigrant, especially if you're the first in your family. So a lot of the people in our community, they're the first ones in their family, not only to like have to figure out college and jobs and all these things, but also investing and retirement. And, you know, many people have grown up their whole life, their whole childhoods, like translating the documents at the doctor for their parents. I'm sure y'all see that all the time. Right. And it's just, you know, bringing that into the finances. And so a lot of our students are not only learning for themselves, but they're learning for their whole family at the same time. And there's a lot of fear that I hear people say, like their parents have about investing, you know, that they're afraid it's like gambling, they're going to lose all their money. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of like individuals stepping up to be the leader in their family, to learn finances and empower the whole family and share what they're learning. That's one of my favorite things that we do, is like when we help someone who has not been able to open their investment account because they don't have immigration status, get it open, and then open one for their parents and their siblings, and like the whole family changes because they're gonna have retirement. You know, they're gonna be able to start having their money work for them. So I just think this is a huge topic, but like there's a really big need for people to take this step to not only like covering the bills and getting by, right, but having their money work for them. Because we have a huge problem in this country where immigrants have been treated in the legal system and the employment systems as sources of cheap labor often. Like the whole immigration law system is based on this, right, of taking advantage of people. I mean, if you want me to just hear me nerd out for 1 second, like the Bracero program was one of the first immigration law policies ever. It was basically bringing in people from Mexico to work the farms and factories when Americans were at war. And then when the Americans came back, they deported all of them. And they would do this in cycles. And that was like the first foundations of the immigration law system. So there's just this huge violent, racist, ugly system that is undergirding, what's the word? I'm blanking, underlying the whole immigration law system that people are being subject to. And so it's like, you have to go through that. And then like, you've been, oftentimes disempowered and dehumanized by that system. And then the financial system on top of that is like another layer to that of, like you all were talking about earlier, like, not making it accessible to certain people and making it so complicated and leaving people out. So there's just so much work. I think I really see it as like a radical act of resistance for immigrant families to learn about finances and get really good at finances. And just a lot of it comes to mindset, what we talked about in the beginning, like choosing to believe you can do that is the hardest part. It's the hardest part. Yeah. And Justin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, of like making, like, I'm sure you've seen that with your community too, about finances, just making that decision to be like, okay, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to get good with my money, or like, I'm going to at least learn the foundation. Has that been a challenge for people in your community?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it's notorious that doctors are just not very good at money.
Really?
It's just kind of, it's just kind of a joke that doctors just aren't good
Why
with
is
money.
that?
I mean, we spend so much time in school learning everything but money. And then, we get out and our careers are very busy, and we're just, well, I have money, I'm just gonna, use it, whatever comes to mind, as opposed to being intentional with it. And so it's been really interesting, talking with colleagues and with residents, being a fellow, or I was attending for a period of time before going back to fellowship, and just, it was amazing being able to just, have a sit down conversation with residents and trainees, and, hear them talk about, I didn't even know what a Roth IRA was. I didn't even know what an emergency fund was. I feel like I don't have, enough money to put towards anything. How should I think about this? And so I think it's really a matter of again, it's different in that I feel like doctors hold a place of privilege in society. But I do think that there is also a need for empowerment, that you can make some choices for yourself, and you can learn these things, and it's not too complicated. And the basics are very accessible and actually pretty simple.
Yeah.
I think Justin should like create this finance education curriculum and then like put a patent on it and then distribute it to all the medical schools. Totally. Like you mentioned, Justin, there is such a large gap in it. And it's really like, it's financial literacy. It's really like, it is one of those things where it governs so much of how we, live our life. I'll give you another example of it. I listened to this podcast episode yesterday. It was by this doctor called Dr. Kevin Poe, and he goes by Kevin MD. He's like one of the OG like bloggers of the whole community, very, very highly regarded. And it was the conversation between him and this contract negotiation lawyer. Right? And the topic of the conversation was, are hospitals evil towards doctors? So immediately I had to check out the episode. I happen to be a doctor working in a hospital. And it's so interesting when you feel so heard and you have so many of your experiences validated and mirrored by a lawyer, because the lawyer was mentioning all these points, and actually he mentioned how his own child had a diagnosis of the George syndrome. So it's one of the genetic abnormalities, and your child can be pretty sick with it. It's like a variety of neurological problems, heart problems, a lot of times they need heart surgery. So he stayed with his child in the hospital for a year, and he noticed how doctors would come in and out, spend the entire day and night with their child, And there was this one night when the cardiologist fellow apologized to him, the lawyer, for taking 10 minutes for a lunch break. And the lawyer was like, well, of course you have to go eat. I mean, doctors eat too, right? So all to say that he just saw the stark reality of what doctors have to go through on a day-to-day basis. And the reason why he got into contract negotiations to begin with was because he realized that it has been so deeply ingrained and conditioned into physicians from the time that they enter medical school that you have to just keep giving, right? Giving and giving and giving and giving until you are done. So when that is sort of your only focus, any and every condition that is thrown at you, you will accept that, right? So if you have to stay longer in the hospital for 2 extra hours to see those 2 extra patients in the chart, you will do it because you are told to. And while that is, of course, it is part of your job and part of your duty, you shouldn't be exploited, just for the goodness of your heart. And I think he just realized that there was a need for lawyers to also guide physicians in the process of negotiating, putting these boundaries, in their own terms. So, yeah, it was really eye-opening. It was just 20 minutes, but I was like, man, it was really amazing to learn so much. Yeah. So anyways, finance curriculum.
I think what you're saying is such an important point too, more generally for the immigrant community, because like back to that thing of people being viewed by the legal system as like sources of cheap labor and not having workers' rights and being taken advantage of and not, being providing all of the, a lot of the healthcare in this country and cooking the food and cleaning and everything, but not being allowed to have a work permit, to have your rights, all this stuff. It's a similar idea where people are ingrained from the beginning of like, you just give and be grateful. You just work hard and be lucky you have a job. Right. Yeah. And I can imagine how compounded that must be if you're an immigrant healthcare professional. Is that something you all have seen?
I mean, yeah, so right now, I am still within the legal immigration framework, and I am one of the 25% of immigrant physicians that contribute to the medical professional pool in the U.S. So 1 in every 4 physicians in the U.S. has a international background and immigrant background, and there are a lot of constraints that people really don't know about on what we can do, what we can, if we can work part-time, we can. I mean, the answer is no, you can't do part-time work outside of your full-time contract. So at times it can feel very constricting, and it can also feel like if you make one wrong move, because your entire base of staying in the US is tied to your employment.
Yes.
Right? So if I were to go and say something that goes back to my hospital board or upsets anyone, if someone reports me and if I get fired tomorrow, then I'm going to be out. Like, I can't stay here anymore. And that definitely plays into how I conduct myself,
Of course.
So, and like you said, yes, I belong to the immigrant community, but I am still so much privileged than the people who are undocumented or people who are working in the agricultural sector or in the restaurant business, where they are like the heart and soul of these fields, yet they are often voiceless, and they really don't have much in the way of, their rights. There's a lot of trauma, associated with that. It's very traumatic to be living that kind of reality where your status is very variable depending on the policies. And with that, again, everything is connected, right? Like your ability to earn a wage, your access to healthcare, your access to food and shelter. So Yeah, it's definitely a very real thing.
It's like your entire sense of security and safety, which we know, if anyone's familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy, I'm sure you all had to study that in school. Like it's really hard to progress to other areas of your life when you don't have that basic security. And I just want to thank you so much for being brave to share that, because
thank you.
I think there's not enough attention being shown on, even if you might be in a more privileged position, you still have to go through these traumas of the system. And, although I have not been through that personally, and I've also been privileged as a US citizen, seeing my husband go through it, he was in the same thing where his visa was based on his work, and he was on short-term contracts. And for a couple of years, he was on like 2 or 3 month contracts, and we didn't know if he would have to leave the country every 2 or 3 months. And it was just so anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
So there are levels of traumas throughout the system and throughout the privileges, and they're all valid and important. And I think it's really important we're talking about that in this talk right now, because I'm sure others feel that too.
Yeah, no, really, thank you so much for, opening that up, opening the whole topic up too, because I haven't really shared as much of it. Of course, within my own circles I have, but it's not very easy to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'll also mention like the pandemic made things extremely challenging and nerve-wracking. I mean, we're talking about since March of 2020 up until now. First of all, all of the governmental departments and services have significantly slowed down. But for those first 6 months or first couple of months, everything had shut down. I mean, it went from like 100 to 0.
Right.
So at that time, personally for me, I was on my way to making the transition from fellowship to my first attending job. And my contract was all set and everything was good to go. But the legal part of it was still pending. Like it switched from one visa class to another. And that depends on USCIS, which is Department of Immigration, to be open and processing the cases. And so now they come out with these announcements saying that we have suspended all of our services until TBD. So there was a time in my life when I was like, I don't know if I will be able to stay in the US, but okay, if I stay, will I be able to start on time, as mentioned in my contract? If not, will I be able to survive in living in California on no income? This is very challenging.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the most mentally challenging things I've ever had to do in my life. But I'm just so incredibly grateful that everything went through. But it continues to still be tough for a lot of them out there.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that, and I can't imagine going through that also with just the stresses you all have had during the pandemic as healthcare professionals. Can you all speak a little bit about that? Because like that is crazy what you all have been through. I mean, I have some friends who are doctors in hospitals, and it's just, I cannot imagine. So like maybe, I don't know, Justin, if you want to maybe take this one off, like how has it been as a doctor during a pandemic and trying to figure out finances?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thank you again for sharing your experience. I appreciate that. I know that's a vulnerable thing to talk about, so thank you. I think being a doctor during the pandemic has been interesting. So I was actually working abroad on a small island in the Pacific when the pandemic first hit, and it was pretty terrifying. We had very few ventilators on island, and we were just not knowing what to expect, and so I experienced working in that environment, and then working here back in the US. I think in some ways we're lucky being pediatric providers. It's hit us differently than it has a lot of our adult colleagues. But I think everybody is feeling the strain and the stress. And I think especially our nursing colleagues are really feeling it. And I think that everybody's kind of stretched thin, and staffing shortages are a real issue across the US. And so I think that, you know, there's just this air of tension that that adds a whole different layer to the job of being a doctor, which is a challenging job in the first place. But you know, I think that when it comes to finances, you know, I've had friends who have, you know, graduated at the time of a hiring freeze. You know, a lot of hospitals were like, yeah, we're not going to hire during this time because, you know, we don't know what to expect. And so I think that that's really impacted people. And some of my friends who are here on visas, you know, trying to negotiate contracts during a hiring freeze with the organization that will accept your visa and work with you to get that done. And I mean, I can't imagine what that must be like. It's got to be so difficult. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I echo a lot of what you mentioned, in that in those first couple of months, I think everyone was trying to figure out what COVID even meant, like what it was doing to our patients, because it is a novel disease and a novel virus. And then, you know, thankfully we got to like just learn more and more about the therapeutics and also, you know, the physiology and all of that of it. And yeah, you know, similarly in our ICU, because the first couple of months when the pandemic hit, especially the US, I was still a fellow in the ICU. And so we would have, you know, a few sick cases here and there, especially with COVID, but for the most part, it wasn't as significant as in the adult population. Now, as you know, an attending, working in the community, where I also see a lot of newborns and critically ill neonates, so that premature babies, I actually sort of get exposed more so to pregnant mothers who are positive for COVID, and some of the sequelae of that. So some of the consequences being either premature delivery. Thankfully, in like 99.9% of cases where moms are positive, the newborns are not sick. They are very healthy. They do very well. And I always tell moms that, especially if you get vaccinated, that you can actually pass on some of those antibodies if you're breastfeeding to your baby. Your baby's actually getting some passive immunity through that. Mm-hmm. But you know, every now and then we have the premature babies that are born. Sometimes moms themselves get a lot sicker after delivery or after the C-section. So them having been taken to the ICU, it's just very distressing to the family because there's just so much going on. Yeah. And so we have to kind of take over the care of the newborn. So that's sort of what I've been, you know, also looking at. Another thing that I've kind of seen as an indirect effect of the pandemic, because it has disrupted access to medical care in some ways to families, where, you know, either they don't medicine or they just haven't been able to go to an office. So sometimes even regular medical conditions can get neglected. Like, for example, a lot of kids coming into the ER with seizures when they should have been you know, treated with medication, and they're not, or there's compliance because the parents just don't know how to use the medication. So there are some of those effects, you know, that we see on the front line. I think personally, one thing that was particularly challenging, and it kind of ties in with all the visa issues that I was having at the beginning, was not being able to travel outside of the US, both because, you know, we are essential, we are needed, you know, you try to always be available, you know, when things escalate. So yeah, sort of having to go between those two and just hoping and praying that my family would be okay and not, you know, fall sick all of a sudden, because that is the one unsettling feeling, right? That you're not able to get to your family on time. when they need you. So that was a little bit challenging, but then I was just really fortunate last year to have, visited them, and they came and visited me. So
Well, that's great.
nice. Yeah.
I'm glad you got to see them.
Yeah, for sure.
That brings up another financial topic for immigrants, which is like saving for those trips or saving to be able to see family. And, sometimes you can't go to a certain country, or there's visa issues. You have to meet somewhere in the middle. It can be really complicated. Or sponsoring families. So that's another thing that people often have to budget around, that makes their financial planning different.
Yeah, absolutely. Those air tickets are not cheap.
Yeah, you're like, I know. Yes.
I mean, traveling in general is expensive, but I feel like, any sort of trips from the US, especially if you're traveling like transatlantic, then it adds up quite a bit. So as with everything else, budgeting that, and if traveling in general is a priority for you, just putting that as a priority into how you allocate your money,
right?
That's really key. Because again, you should be able to get all those experiences that you want, especially through traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have covered so much good stuff. Is there anything else either of you wants to touch on that we have missed?
Just kind of look at our document. I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad this is more like a easy conversational style, and I do think that we've covered quite a bit.
We did. I think we did.
So, I mean, just as I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I saw that someone had a question about balancing the doctor lifestyle while pursuing financial freedom. I know you all talked about that a little bit, the lifestyle inflation, but I would love to hear about like how do you let yourself enjoy it, that hard-earned money you made after all those years of school and debt, while also being responsible with your financial planning and all that.
Yeah, I can quickly touch on this. I think the thing that you have mentioned about paying yourself first is super important, right? So what does that look like? So that looks like automating your savings. I actually automate my investments as well. So instead of thinking of my investment bucket as something that's coming out of my savings, the money that I eventually save at the end of paying my bills and investment, it's already been taken care of.
Great.
So I think when I made sort of that switch, and again, it started with a switch in my brain, when I did that, and I do think of investing as paying myself in the long term. So once I was able to do that, the rest of the money was really sort of up to me to decide to either spend it upfront, or if I wanted to save it for a bigger goal in the future. So if I really want to take that trip, or if I want to buy a certain thing, or if I want to help out a family member, again, that really is up to what are the priorities in your life. But that's just how I think of it conceptually.
Yeah, I think that's a really great perspective. I think that values-based spending is kind of what is kind of the term that I like to use, and the idea that you should be able to enjoy things, and it's not wrong to want to travel or want to go out and eat or whatever. And I think that it's important to kind of take a moment and think, like, what are the things that actually bring you happiness and add value to your life, and spend on those things, and, if you're buying the newest car or the biggest house to kind of keep up with your other friends who are doing the same, that's, is that going to make you happy? I don't know. You'll have to answer that question. But, if you have certain values and it's really important to you to be able to do these certain things, then absolutely, budget for those things. And I think that sinking funds are a really helpful way to approach it. And, if you need $8,000 for a trip 2 years from now, divide that by 24 months and put that money away every month, and then you'll have your $8,000, or whatever the case may be, or whatever that expense is, and just, prioritizing the things that actually add value to your life and spending on those, and then cutting back on the things that are superfluous beyond that. And I think what you're talking about paying yourself first, making sure that you're getting the savings emergency fund taken care of, you're getting your investments settled, and then that money that you have left over, spending it on things that bring you joy.
Couldn't agree more. Very well said, both of you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, it was so awesome talking to you both, and just shout out to the pediatric doctors in the world, because I have a 2-year-old, and I'm very grateful people like you exist in case you ever need help. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. When I saw you're both pediatric, I'm like, oh, so nice. We love all the doctors that help her when she needs it. So thanks for your amazing work and highlighting these very important topics, sharing your personal experiences, even though it's very vulnerable. So really, really appreciate it.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed speaking with you and learning from you both. I think
Yeah, likewise. I had such a wonderful time, and hopefully we can do this some other time and tackle on another topic.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just part 1.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.